Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. Page 1. A spectre is haunting Europe, a spectre of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to hunt down and exorcise this spectre. Pope and Tsar, Minich and Guterres, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been denounced as communistic by its opponents in power? Where is this opposition that has not hurled back in the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties, as well as against its reactionary adversaries? Two things result from this fact. Number one, communism is already acknowledged by all Europe powers to be itself a power. Number two, it is high time that communists should openly in the face of the whole world publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet with the nursery of the tale, the spectre of communism, with the manifesto of the party itself. To this end, communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. The bourgeoisie and the proletarians. The history of the hetero-existing society is the history of class struggles. By bourgeoisie, it is meant to the people in the class of modern capitalist owners, which means the social production employees of wage labor. By proletarians, the people in the class of modern wage laborers who have no means of production of their own, are reduced to selling their labor power in order to live. That is all written in history. In 1847, the prehistory of society, the social organization existing previous to the record of history, was all but unknown. Since then, Haxthorus discovered common ownership in land in Russia. Maurer proved it to be the social foundation which all Teutonic races started in history. And by village, communists were found to be, or have been, the primitive form of society everywhere from India to Ireland. The inner organizations of the primitive communistic society was laid bare, in its typical form, by Morgan's crowning discovery of true nature, but the genes in its relation to the tribe. With the dissolution of these primal communistic societies, begins to be differentiated from separate and finally antagonistic classes. I have attempted to retrace this process in the dissolution in Der Uprise der Family, de Primitive ou de Satz. The Origin of the Family, Private Property and State. Second edition, Stuttgart, 1886. Note by Eagles in this edition of 1888. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman. In a world of oppressor and oppressed, so in contrast oppression to one another, carried on the uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolution or reconstruction of society at large, or the common ruin of the struggling classes. In the early epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. In the ancient Rome, we have the patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves, Middle East, the feudal, the lords, the vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, and serfs. And with all of these particular classes again, and other subordinate granates. Granation. The modern bourgeoisie society has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society, have not done away with the class of antagonisms. It has only established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in the place of the old one. The opera of the bourgeoisie shows, however, the distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. From the source of the Middle Ages sprang the charactered burghs in the earliest towns. From these burghs, the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh ground for these risking bourgeoisie. The East Indian and the Chinese markets of the colonization of America trade with the colonies that increased the means of exchange to the commodities generally gave to commence to navigate to industry and impulse never known before, and thereby to a revolution attempt in the tottering feudal society of rapid development. The feudal system of industry, under which industrial production was monopolized by closed guilds, now no longer suffice for the growing once more of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. The guildmasters push on one side of the manufacturing middle class. Divisions of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of the division of labor in each single workshop. Meanwhile, the markets kept on growing. Demand went on rising. Manufacturing no longer was able to keep up with this growth. Then steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. This manufacture was taken off the giant modern industry in the place of industrial middle classes by industrial millionaires, the leaders of the whole industry, armies, and modern bourgeoisie. Modern industry established the whole market, to which the discovery of America paved the way. The market has given immense development to commerce and to navigate and to communicate by land. This development has, in turn, reacted on extension of industry. In proportion of industry commenced navigation, doorways extended. In the same proportion, the bourgeoisie developed and increased its capital and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie is itself the product of a long course of development of a series of revolutions in the modes of production and exchange. Each step of the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political events of that class. The oppressed class under the sway of the feeble nobility, an armed and self-governed association and middle commune. Here, an independent urban republic, as in Italy and Germany, they are taxable for the state, and a monarch, as in France, outward in the period of the manufacturing proper, serving either in the simul-feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpose against nobility, and in fact, a cornerstone of the great monarchies in general. The bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of the modern industry and of the road market, conquered for itself in the modern representative state inclusion in political sway. The executive of the modern state and the committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie historically has played the most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put to an end of all feudal, patriarchal, ideological relations. It has purposely torn asunder the mostly feudal ties that bound man to the natural superiors, and has left remain no other bond between man and man, the naked self-interest and the commonest cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fever, the silvery enthusiasm, the philosophic sentiments, and the icy water of egotistic calculation. It has resolved personal worth into the exchange value in place of the numberless and defenseless characterized freedoms that set up that single unconscionable freedom, free trade. In a world for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. Bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation, has the honored, looked up to reverent all. That has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, and the poet, the man of society, into page of wage labors. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its mental veil and has reduced the family relation to mere money relationship. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionaries so much admire. Found its fitting complement to the laziest indolence, and it has been the first to show what man's activities can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expectations that put to shame all the former exodus of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constant revolutionizing of the instruments of production, and by the relations of production with them, the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production is then altered form. On the contrary, the first condition of this existence for all earlier industrial classes, concept revolutionizing of the production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting and certain end. Oh, this Chex mix is good. Agitation distinguished the bourgeoisie up from the earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations with the trains of the ancient variable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new formed ones become inadequate before they can ossify. All that is sold melts into the air. All that wholly is profane, and the man is last compelled to face his real condition are and his mutual relations with the sober eye. The need of constantly expanding markets for its products chases the bourgeoisie to the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, sell everywhere, establish connections everywhere. Bourgeoisie has, though, its exploitation of the world market given cosmopolitan character to product and consumption in every country. To this great charging of reactionaries, it is drawn from under the feet of industry to the national ground on which it stood. So the great charge and reaction is that John Foreman defeated that. I read that. All established nations' industries have been destroyed, or are daily being destroyed. They're dislodged by the new industry, whose introduction becomes a life and death question. All civilized nations by industry has no longer worked up the indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remote zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home but in every quarter of the globe. In each of the old ones satisfied by the production of the country, we find new ones, acquiring from their satisfaction the product of distant lands and climates. In the place of the old local national seclusions of the self-sufficiency, we have intercourse the every direction, universal interdependence of the nations, and as in the material we are also intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. Nationally, one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous nations and local literatures there emerges a world literature. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, has immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even in the most backward nations of the civilization, the cheap prices of the commodities, the heavy artillery with the battle and all the Chinese walls, in which it forces the underdeveloped nations to intensely obstinate hatred of the foreigners and capital, and it compels all nations on pain and extinction to adopt the bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization to the midst, to become the bourgeoisie themselves. In one word, it creates a world in its own image. The bourgeoisie in the subjected rural areas of the rural cities has created numerous cities and has greatly increased the urban population compared with the rural. It has thus rescued a considerable part of the population of the idiocy of the rural life. Just as it has made the country independent of the cities, so has it made the barbarian of the semi-underdeveloped countries dependent on the civilized ones, nations of peasants on nations of bourgeoisie, the east to the west. Bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of population, has also means of production and property. It has agglomerated population, centralized means of production, and has concentrated property in a few hands. The necessary consequences of this political centralization, independent or loosely connected provinces with separate estates, laws, government, and system of taxation became lumped together in one nation, which one government, one code of laws, one national class mindset, one frontier, and one custom tariff. The bourgeoisie, during its rule of the scarcely 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal production forces that have been needing for generations together. Subjectation of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of the chemistry and the industry, agriculture, steam, navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing the whole contents for cultivation, canalization of the rivers, whole population conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had a precedent of such productive forces slumber in the lap of the social labor. We see them, the means of the production and exchange, whose foundation the bourgeoisie built itself up. We are generating feudal society in a certain stage in development of these means of production and exchange of the conditions under which feudal society produces and exchanges. A feudal organization of agriculture and the manufacturing industry in one world, a feudal relationship with property have no longer become compatible to already developed production forces. They become so many fetters that to burst asunder we were burst asunder. into place a step-free compensation, accompanied by social and political construction adapted to it, and by the economical and political sway of the bourgeoisie class. A similar movement has been going on with our own eyes. Modern bourgeoisie society and its relations, production and exchange of the property and the social that had conjured up gigantic means of production and exchange is like the sorcerer who is no longer able to control his powers with the subterranean world, which he has called up by spells. Main decades in the history of industry and commence has been out of the history of the revolt of modern production forces against modern conditionalists, the production against property relations that are the conditions for the existence of the bourgeoisie and its rule. It is enough to mention that the commercial crisis that the political periodical return put on trial, each time more threateningly of existence of the entire bourgeoisie society. And these crises have a great part of not only the existing products, but also of the previous created productive forces in the periodical destroyed. And these crises there breaks out of an epidemic that in all early ops would have seemed to absurdity in the epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself back into the state of momentary barbarism, as if it remains the universal war of destruction has cut off the supply of every means of substance and industry and commerce itself be destroyed. But why? There's too much civilization, too much means substance, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at disposal of the society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions bourgeoisie property. In the contrary, they had become too powerful for these conditions by which they are fettered, and soon they will overcome these fetters. Back. Demand machinery application of chemistry in industry and agriculture. Oh, I was already there. No longer able to control the powers of the I was already there. There I am. As they overcome to these fertiles and bring disorder into the whole of bourgeoisie society, endanger the existence of bourgeoisie property. The conditions of the bourgeoisie society are too narrow to compromise, but the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeoisie get to these crises? On one hand, by enforced destruction and mass production forces, and the other by conquest of new markets and more the exploitation of the old ones. That is easy to say by putting the way to far more extensive, more destructible crises by diminishing the means of whereabout the crisis is prevented. The weapon with which the bourgeoisie filled feudalism to the ground and now against the bourgeoisie itself. Not only has the bourgeoisie forged from the weapons that bring its death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield these weapons in modern working class and proletarians. In proportion as the bourgeoisie, i.e. capital, has developed in the same proportion as the proletarian, in the modern working class will develop a class of laborers who live only so long to find work, and who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. These laborers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity. Like every other article, they're constantly exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition, all the fluctuations of the market. Owing to the extensive use of machinery and the divisions of labor, the work of the proletarians have lost all individual character and consequently all the charm of the working man. He became an apprentice to the machine as the only most simple, the most meritorious, and the most easily acquired knack of that is required of him. Hence, the cost of production of a working man is constricted almost entirely of the means of substance, and that he requires for the maintenance of those propaganda of his race. but the price of commodity is therefore also of labor is equal to the cost of production, but the proportion therefore is repulsiveness as the work increases and the wage decreases. What is more in proportion as the use of machine or division and labor increases, the same proportion as the burden of the toil and also increases. Either the prolongation of the working hours by increasing the work excited in a given time or increase the speed of machinery, etc. Modern industry has converted the little workshop into the patriarchal master of the great factory. Of the industrial capitalists. Masses of laborers crowd into the factory are organized like soldiers, as privates in the industry army are placed under command in a perfect hierarchy of officers and sergeants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeoisie class and of the bourgeoisie state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine and the foreman, and all above by the individual bourgeoisie manufacturer himself. More openly disproportionate proclaimed gain to be in self in its end to aim. The more petty, the more hateful, and the more embittering it is. Less of the skill, exertion of the strength, and pride in the man of labor. In other words, a modern industry becomes developed as the labor of men superseded by that of women. Differences in age and sex no longer have any distinctive social variability of working class and all instruments of labor, more or less expensive to use according to their age and sex. No sooner is the exploitation of the labor by the manufacturer so far to an end that he receives his wages in cash, that he has set upon another proportion of bourgeoisie and middle class shopkeepers and pawnbrokers, etc. Almost out of Chex minutes. No sooner is the exploitation of the labor by the manufacturer so far at an end that he receives his wages in cash, and he is upon the other proportion of bourgeoisie and the shopkeeper and the pawnbroker, etc. The lower strata of the middle class and the small tradespeople, shopkeeper and retired tradesmen, generally the hand craftsmen and the farmers, all these sink gradually into proletarian, partially because their dominial capital does not suffice for the scale on which modern industry is carried on, and the swamp for the competition with large capitalist parties because of the specialized skill of the rendered worthless by new methods of production. Thus the proletarian recruiting of all classes of the population. The proletarian goes through various stages of development. With its birth begins a struggle of many bourgeoisie, that first contests and carried on by the individual laborers, then by the workers of the factory, and members of one trade in one locality against the individual bourgeoisie who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks not against the bourgeoisie conditions of production, but against the instruments of production themselves. They destroy imported wares that compete with their labor. They smash machinery to pieces and set factories ablaze. They seek to restore the force of that vanished state of the workingman of the Middle Ages. At this stage, the laborers still form an incoherent mass scattered over the whole country and broken up by the mutual competition. If the workers unite at all this is not yet the consequence of their own initiative, but the mind of the bourgeoisie, which class, in order to attain its own political ends, is compelled to set a whole proletariat in motion. And it is moreover still able to do so. At this stage, therefore, the proletarians do not fight their enemies, but the enemies of their enemies, the remnants of absolute monarchy, the landowners and the non-industrial bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie. Thus, the whole historical movement is concentrated on the hands of the bourgeoisie, and every victory obtained is victory of the bourgeoisie. Dog. But the development of the industry and the proletarians, it only increases in number, and it becomes concentrated in grand masses, and its strength grows, and it feels more strength more. It feels that strength more. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more equalized, as the proportion as the machines obliterates the distinctions of labor, and nearly everywhere reduces wages at the same low level. The growing competition among the bourgeoisie, the result of commercial crisis, makes that the wages of the workers are more fluctual. The increasing improvement machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihood more and more precarious. The collisions between individual workmen and individual bourgeoisie take more and more character, and collisions between the two classes. Therefore, the workers begin to form combinations, trade unions against the bourgeoisie. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provisions beforehand these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks into riots. From time to time, the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit of the battle lies not in the immediate result, but the ever-expanding union of the workers. This union is helped by the improved means of communication that are created by modern industry, and that place the workers of different localities in contact with one another. This contact, which is needed to centralize the numerous local struggles, all of the same character, into one nationality struggle between classes, but every class struggle is political struggle, and the union attained to which bourges of the Middle Ages have their miserable highways required centuries of modern proletarians, thanks to railways achieved in a few years. This organization of proletarians into a class, and consequently into a political party, and continual being upset again by the competition among the workers themselves, but it constantly rises up again, stronger, firmer, mightier. It compels the legislative recognition of the particular interests of the workers by taking advantage of divisions among the bourgeoisie itself, and thus the 10-hour bill in England carried. Moreover, collusions between the classes of the old society advance in many ways in the course of the development of the proletarians. The bourgeoisie finds itself involved in the constant battle, at first of the aristocracy. What is it?
Try. Blueberry. It's blueberry pancake.
No.
I don't give a shit.
I don't want this blueberry pancake.
So don't eat it.
Ah. That was a nasty blueberry pancake. I am back. I had to throw away the nasty blueberry pancake. Okay. Further, we have already seen the entire sections of the ruling classes are in advance of the industry, precipitant to the proletariat, at least the threatened conditions of existence. These are supplied by proletariat with fresh elements of the Enlightenment process. Finally, in times which the class struggle nears the decisive hour, process of dissolution going on within the ruling classes, In fact, with the whole range of society assumes that such a violent, glaring characteristic of a small section of ruling classes could suffer drift and joins the revolutionary class, and the class holds its future in its hands, just as therefore as in earlier period, the section of the nobility went over in the bourgeoisie is now proletarian. The bourgeoisie goes over the proletarian, the particular portion of the bourgeoisie ideologists who have raised themselves into the level to comprehend the theoretical, the movement as a whole, historical movement as a whole. All the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today and the proletarian alone have really revolutionary classes, and the other classes decay as the final disappear in the face of modern industry, and the proletarian is special in its essential product. The lower middle class and the small manufacturer, the shopkeeper and artisans of the peasant, and all of these fight against bourgeoisie to save the extension of the existence of the fractions of the middle class. They are therefore not a revolutionary but conservative. What is more, they are reactionary, for they try to roll back the wheels of history. If by chance they are revolutionary, they're so only in the view of that impending transfer of the proletariat, that I thus defend that not in the present, but in the future interests, they desert their own standpoint to place themselves in the proletariat, the dangerous class of the social scum, that passively rotting mass thrown over by the lowest layers of society, may here and there be swept into the movement of the proletarian revolutions, and the conditions of life, however, prepare it far more for the part of the bridle of reactionary intriguery. The living conditions of the old society at large have already virtually swamped the living conditions of the proletarian. The proletarian is without property of his relations to his wife and his children, and has no longer anything in common with the bourgeoisie. Family relations, modern industrial labor, modern subjectual to capital, the same in England as in France, America, and Germany, has stripped him from every trace of national character. Law, morality, religion are to him so many bourgeoisie prejudices, behind which lurk an ambush and many bourgeoisie interests. All the preceding classes that got the upper hand sought to fortify their already acquired status by subjecting society at large to the conditions of the appropriation. The proletarians cannot become masters of the production forces of society, except by abolishing their own previous mode of operation, thereby also every other previous mode of operation. They have nothing of their own to secure and fortify. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for an insurance of individual property. All previous historical movements were movements of minorities and interests of minorities. The proletarian movement is a self-conscious, independent movement with immersed majority. In the interstate of immersed majority, the proletariat, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot stir, cannot raise itself up without the whole superincumbent strata of official society being sprung up into air. I miss my Chex mix. Though non-substance yet in form, the struggle of the proletarian and the bourgeoisie is at first a national struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first of all, settle matters with its own bourgeoisie. In depicting the most general phases of the development of the proletariat, we trace the more or less veiled civil war. This book kills me. Raging within existing societies up to the point where the war breaks out into open revolution, and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays in the foundation of the sway of the proletariat. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we have already seen, on the antagonisms of oppressed and oppressed classes. In order to oppress a class, certain conditions must be assured to it under which it can at least continue to salvage existence. The serf, in a period of serfdom, raised himself to be a member of the commune, just as the petty bourgeoisie, under the yoke of the feudal absolutism, managed to develop into a bourgeoisie. The modern labor and the contractor, instead of rising with the progressive industrial, sinks deeper and deeper and below the conditions of existence into his own class. He becomes the pauperism develops into more rapidly than population and wealth, and here it becomes evident that bourgeoisie isn't fit any longer to be the ruling class of society and to impose its conditions of existence upon society with overriding law. It is unfit to rule because incompetent to assure the existence of its slave within the slavery, because it cannot help letting him sink into such a state that it has to feed him. Instead of being fed up to him, society can no longer live in the bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer comparable with society. The essentially condition of this existence, and for the sway of the bourgeoisie classes, the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition of capital is wage labor. Wage labor rests exclusively on the competition between the laborers. The vice of the industry and those involuntary promoter of the bourgeoisie replaces the isolation of the laborers. Due to competition of the revolutionary combinations, due to association, the development of the modern industry therefore cuts from under its feet and very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates production. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces above all is its own grave diggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletarian are equal and inevitable. Inevitable. That was chapter 1. Chapter 2. Proletarians and Communists. How many more pages? 36 more pages. Okay, I'll do it. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form separate parties opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interest separate from those of the proletariat of a whole. They do not set up the sectionary principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletariat movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. Number 1. In the national struggles of the proletarians in the different countries, they point out and bring to the front of the commodities interests in the entire proletariat independently of the nationalities. Number 2. In a various stage of development of the struggles of the working class against bourgeoisie has to pass through and always and everywhere represents the interests of the movement as a whole. Communists, therefore, on the other hand, practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties in whichever country that section pushes forward all others, and on the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of proletariat the advantage of the clearly understanding line of march and conditions and the ultimate general results in the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all the other proletariat parties, formations of the proletariat to class to overthrow all of the bourgeoisie supremacy. Conquest of the political power of the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on the ideas or principles that would have been invented or discovered by this or that would be universal reformer, They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from the existence class struggle from a historical movement going under very eyes. The abolition of the existing property relations is not all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subjected to historical change, consequent upon the change of which historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor for bourgeoisie property. The distinguishing feature of the communism is not the abolition of the property general, but the abolition of the bourgeoisie property. But modern bourgeoisie, private property, in the final, the most complete expression of the system producing the appropriating products that is based on the class antagonisms and the exploitations of the many by the few. In this sense, the theory of communists may be summed up with a single phrase: abolition of the private property. We communists have been reapproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of man's own labor, which properly is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of the petty artisan and of the small peasant, a form of the property that precede the bourgeoisie form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it. It is still destroying it daily. Or do you mean the modern bourgeoisie, private property? But does wage labor create any property for the labor? Not a bit. It creates capital, i.e., that kind of property that exploits wage labor and that cannot increase except upon conditions of getting new supply of wage labor for a fresh exploitation property. In its present form, is based on the antagonisms of the capitalists and wage labor. Let's examine both sides of antagonism. To be a capitalist is to not only a purely personal and social status of production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of the members in the society can it be set in motion. Capital is therefore not a personal, it is a social power. When, therefore, the capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It has only social characterized of the property that has changed. It loses its class character. Let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e. the quantum that means substance which is absolutely required to keep the laborer bear existence as the laborer. But therefore, the wage laborer appropriates and proportionates by this means of his labor merely suffice to prolong and reproduce with his bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal operation as the products of labor and the operation of the main existence of the reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command with the labor of the others. All that we want is to do away with the miserable character in the operation under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed to live only in so far as the interest of the ruling class requires it. I miss Chex Mix. In bourgeoisie society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communistic society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the labor. In bourgeoisie society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communistic society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeoisie, social capital is independent from the individuality. I knew that word. While the living person is dependent and has no individuality. And the abolition of the state of things is called by the bourgeoisie abolition of the individuality. The abolition of the state of things is called by the bourgeoisie to abolish the and freedom. And rightly so. The abolition of the bourgeoisie, bourgeoisie underpins in the bourgeoisie freedom, but undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom is meant under the present bourgeoisie conditions of production, free trade, free selling, and free buying. Not free buying. But if sales and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. Let's talk about free selling and buying and all other brave words of our bourgeoisie about freedom in general have a meaning, and if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying with the fettered traders in the Middle Ages, but had no means of opposed by the communistic abolition buying and selling, the bourgeoisie condition of production and the bourgeoisie itself. If you are horrified at the intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society private property is already done away with for 19ths of the population, its existence for the few is solely due to the non-existence of hands of whose 19ths. You approach us, therefore, the intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence of non-existence, whose existence is the non-existence of any property in the immense majority of society. In one word, you reapproach us with the intent to do away with your property. Precisely so is just what we intend. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent into social power, capable of being monopolized, i.e. from the moment when individual property can no longer be transferred into bourgeoisie property and to capital, from that moment you can say individual vanishes, and individuality. Got it! Yes! You must therefore confess by individual you mean no other person by the bourgeoisie than the middle class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Ooh. Communism deprives no man of that power to appropriate the product society. All that is to deprive of that power to subject the labor by the means is such appropriation. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease. Universal laziness will take us. According to this, bourgeoisie society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through the sheer idleness. For those of its members who work and acquire nothing, for those acquiring nothing and work, the whole of the objectation is but another expression of tautology, that there can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode has mode of producing and operation material products have in the same way been urged against the communistic models of producing and operation and textual products. Just as to the bourgeoisie, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, and so the disappearance of the class structure to him identically with the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he eliminates, is the enormous majority of the mere training and act of the machine. But don't wrangle us with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeoisie property the standard of your bourgeoisie notions of freedom, culture, law, etc. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of conditions of your bourgeoisie adaptation and bourgeoisie property. Just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into the law for all, a will whose essential character of direction of determined by economical conditions of the existence of your class, the selfish misconceptions that induce you to transform into the eternal laws of nature and the reasons, the social forms springing from your presence mode of present mode, a production form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear with the products of production. This misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. What you see clearly in the case of the ancient property and the admit in the cases of feudal property, you are of course forbidden to admit in these cases of your own bourgeoisie form of property. Abolitions of the family, even the most radical, flare up with the infamous proposal of the communist. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeoisie family, based? On capital, on private gain, and its completely developed form of the family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in practical absence of the family among the proletarians in public prostitution. Oh, prostitution. I cannot read. The bourgeoisie family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanish of the capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you will say we will destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace the home education by social. Your education is not also social, determined by the social conditions under which you're educated by the interventions direct or indirect society means, school, etc. The communists have not invented the interventional society and education that merely seek to alter the characteristics of the invention to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeoisie claptrap of the family and education, the hollowed correlation of parent and child becomes all the more disgusting. The more by the action of the modern industry, all family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and the children transformed into simple articles of commence and instruments of labor. But you communists, would you introduce free love? Screams the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. If the bourgeoisie sees in his wife a mere instrument of production, he hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally, can come to no other conclusion than the law of being common to all their likewise fall into the woman. He has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women and mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing more radical than the virtuous indignation of the bourgeoisie at free love, which they pretend is not openly and officially established by the communism. The communists have no need to introduce free love. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeoisie, not content with having the wives and daughters of the proletarians in disposal, not to speak of the common prostitutes. Ooh. Take supreme delight in the seducing each other's wives. Bourgeoisie marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus the most of what communists might possibly reproach is that they desire to introduce the substitution of hypocritical, concealed, and open legalized system of free love. "26 more pages. 26 more pages. 26 more pages." Moreover, it's self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of free love springing from that system, i.e. the prostitution both public and private. The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. Working men have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, that vice to be itself a leading class of the nation must constitute itself the nation. It is so far itself a nation, but though not in the bourgeoisie sense of the word. That was a nice fart. National differences and antagonisms between people are daily vanishing owing to the development of the bourgeoisie to freedom of commerce to the world market to uniformly in the mode of production and conditions of life corresponding to theorto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action to the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the conditions of the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion to that, exploitations of one individual by another is put to an end. The exploitation of one nation by another will also be put to an end. In proportionate to the antagonism between classes with nations vanish. Oh, the book I've read. This book is old. The hostiles from one nation to another will come to an end. The charges against communism will be made religious and philosophical in a generally from the ideological standpoint are not deserving a serious examination. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, concept, in one word, man's consciousness changes with every changed conditions of the material's existence, and his social relations with the social life what does the history of ideas prove? Then the intellectual product changes in the character and the proportion the material produces change. The ruling ideas of each age. I what does history of ideas prove? That intellectual production change in the character and the proportion that when people speak of ideas revolutionize society, they do express that the fact that within the old society elements of the new one have been created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old uh, conditions of the existence. When the ancient world was in itself the last throes, the ancient religions have overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with them in the revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to sway a free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it would be said that religious, moral, philosophical, and ideas have been modified in course the historical development, but religious, moral or morality, philosophical, political science, and law constant surviving this change. There are besides eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to the state of society. But communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and morality. Instead of constituting them on a new basis, it therefore acts in contrary to put past historical experiences. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has been consisted of the development of the class antagonisms and the assumed different of the different arcs. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common of the all past stages, this: the exploitation of one part of society by another. No wonder then that the social consciousness of the past stages, despite all the multiplicity of the various it displays, moves with in certain common forms and the general ideas which cannot completely vanquish except for the total disappearance of the class antagonisms. The communist revolt is the most radical rupture of the communist property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture of the tradition ideas. But let's have done with the bourgeoisie objection to communism. We have seen above that the first step to revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat designers of ruling class, and increase the total productivity of the forces as rapidly possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads in the rights of the property and the conditions of bourgeoisie production. By means of the measures, therefore, that appear economically insufficient, the untenable, but which in the course of the movement outstrip themselves. Necessities farther inroads upon the old social order are unavoidable by means of entirely revolutionizing the whole mode of production. These measures will of course be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally acceptable. 1. Abolish of property in the land of applications of all rents and land of progress. 2. All heavy progressive of the graduated tax income. 3. Abolish all right to inheritance. 4. Confiscate the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of the credit of the hands of each state by means of national banks with the state capital and exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralize the means of the communication and the transport of the hands of the state. 7. Extension of the factory and the instruments of the production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands and improvement of the soil, generally in accordance with the common plan. 8. Equal liability to all labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agriculture and manufacturing industries. Gradually abolish all of the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the population all over the country. 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolish the child's factory labor in present form. Combinations of education within the industrial productions, etc., etc. In the course of development, the class distinctions have disappeared, and all production have been concentrated in the hands of the vast associations of the whole nation. The public power will lose its political character, the political power properly so called. It's merely organized power in one of the classes for oppressing one another. If the proletariat, during its contest with the bourgeoisie, is compelled by the force of the circumstances to organize itself in the class, if by means of revolution it makes itself a ruling class, and if as such sweeps away by the force of the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existing of the class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby be abolished in its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeoisie society and its classes and the class of antagonism, we shall have a association in which the free development of each of the conditions of free development of all. Chapter 3. Socialist in Communist Literature. 1. Reactionary Socialism. A. Feudal Socialism. Please tell me it ends after that. I got 20 pages and I'm done. 20 pages. Owing to the historical position and became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeoisie society in the French revolutions of 1830, and in the English form of the agitation of these aristocracies and succumb to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth a serious political contest was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible, but even the domain of literature in the old cries of the historical period has become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy in Aristotle were obliged to lose sight, partly in their own interest of formulating the document against the bourgeoisie, and the interest of exploitation working by the class alone. Interest in formally thrown indictments against the bourgeoisie and the interest in exploitation of the working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their revenge by singing lampoons on their master, and was whispering in his ear sinister prophecies coming to catastrophe. In this way, feudal socialism rose. Half lamentations, half lampoon, half ep on the past, half menace of the future. At times, by its bitter, witty, and incisive criticism striking by the bourgeoisie, to the very quick but always ludicrous in its effect through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, nor to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front for a banner, but the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hind quarters the old feudal coats and arms, and desired with loud and irreverent laughter. One section of the French legitimists in Young England exhibited this spectacle. In pointing out the mode of exploitation was different from that the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forget that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different and that are now adequate in showing that under their rule the modern proletariat never existed. They forget that the modern bourgeoisie is necessary offspring for their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of the criticisms that their chief accusation against the bourgeoisie amounts to this: that under the bourgeoisie ranked a class is being developed which is destined to cut up, root, and branch the old order of society. What they upbrand the bourgeoisie is not so much as it creates a proletarian, creates a revolutionary proletarian. In the political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class in ordinary life. Despite their high feudal phases, they stoop to pick up golden apples dropped from the trees of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor the traffic of wool, beetroot, sugar, potato spirits. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has the satirical socialism, feudal socialism. Nothing is easier to give a Christian sentiments a social tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in the peace of these, charity and poverty, celibacy, mortification of the flesh, monastics of life, mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water of which the priest consummates the vex of the aristocrat. Be petty bourgeoisie socialism. The feudal aristocrats is not only the only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie, not the only class whose conditions of existence perished in the atmosphere of the modern bourgeoisie society. The medieval boors and the small farmer prospectors were the persecutors of the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries, they are but little developed. Industrial and commercial of these two classes still vegetate side by side in rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeoisie has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie, as ever and renewing itself as applied mentally to the part of bourgeoisie society. And individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of the competition. As the modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear in independent sections of the modern society to be replaced by the manufacturers, agricultures, and commensal overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. In the countries like France, where the farmers constitute far more than half the population, it was natural for writers who side with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use in their criticisms of the bourgeoisie regime the standard of the farmer and petty bourgeoisie, and from the standpoint of these intermediate classes, they wait. There. In the countries like France, where in the schools of socialism dissected into the great agriculturists, the contractors, and the conditions of modern production, it be layers with hypocritical apologies of the economists, the proved incontrollability of the distress effects of the machinery and divisions of labor, the concentration of capital and land of the few hands, overproduction crisis, as pointed out, the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeoisie and the farmer, the misery of the proletariat, like anarchy in production, the crying inequalities of distribution of wealth, the industrial war for extermination between nations, the dissolution of the old moral bonds, the old family relations of the old nationalists. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to be restoring old means of production and of exchange with them in the old property relations with the old society, or the cramping of the modern means of production and the exchange of within the framework in the old property relations that have been either bound to be exploded by those means. In either case, it has been both reactionary and utopia. And last words are that corporate guilds for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture, ultimately stubborn historical facts have dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deception of the former socialism and ended up in the hanging over. C. German or true socialism. The socialist and the communist literature of France and literature that originating under the pressure of the bourgeoisie in power that was the expression of the struggle against the power was introduced into Germany at the time the bourgeoisie in that country have just begun to contest with the feudal absolutism. German philosophers would be philosophers Espitz eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting when these writings emigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not emigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, the French literature lost all the immediate practical significance and assumed the priori literal aspect. Thus, to the German philosophers of the 18th century also remained of the first French revolutionaries were nothing more than the demands of the practical reason, the general and utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie, sufficing in their eyes the law is pure will has been bound to the true human will generally. The work of the German literati consisted solely of bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophy consciousness, or rather an annexing of French ideas but deserting their own philosophical point of view. The annex took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated, namely by translation. It is well known that the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classic works of ancient pagan civilizations have been written. The German literature revised this process with profane French literature. They wrote the philosophical nonsense beneath the French original, the Francis beneath the French critic, and the economics functions of money. They wrote Our Nation's Humanity beneath the French critics of the bourgeoisie state. They wrote Die Thought of Category in Journal and so forth. The introduction of the philosophical phrases at the end of the French historical criticism they dubbed Philosophy of Action, the True Socialism, German Science and Socialism, Philosophicalism, Foundation of Socialism, and so on. French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated, and since it ceased in the hands of the Germans, so to express the struggles of the one class to another, he felt conscious about having overcome French one-sidedness of representing of the not true requirements and the requirement of the truth and nature of the proletariat, but the interest of the human nature, the man of man, in general, who belongs to no class, no reality, or exists in only misty realm of philosophical fantasy. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly and extended its poor stock in trade in the modern bank fashion. The fight against the German, especially the Prussian bourgeoisie against feudal aristocracy, absolute monarchy, in other words, the liberal movement, became more earnest. Thus, the long-wished opportunity was offered to true socialists in the confronting of the political movement and the social demands of the hurling tradition, anthems against liberals, liberalism against representative government, against bourgeoisie competition, bourgeoisie freedom in the press, bourgeoisie legislation, bourgeoisie liberty and equality, preaching the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose from the bourgeoisie movement. German socialism forgot in the nick of time that the French criticism, whose silly awk it was, presupposed the existence of the modern bourgeoisie society and its corresponding economic conditions of existence in the political constitution adapted thereto, the very things whose attainment was the object of pinning struggle in Germany, to the absolute monarchies of the following of parsons and professors, country squires, and officials. It served a welcome scarecrow against the threatening bourgeoisie, and it was a sweet finish to the bitter pills of the floggings and bullets of which the same government just at the time dosed the Germans' working class risings. While this true socialism thus served the government as a weapon fighting against the German bourgeoisie, it at the same time directly represented a reactionary interest, the interest of the German petty bourgeoisie in Germany. The petty bourgeoisie class, a relic of the 16th century, since then constantly cropping up under various forms, is the real social less existing state of things. To preserve this, the class is to preserve the existence of things in Germany, the industrial and political supremacy of bourgeoisie threatens it with certain destruction on one hand of the concentrations of capital, on the other the rise of revolutionary proletariat. True socialism appeared to kill these two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. The road of the speculation cobwebs embroidered with flowers and rhetoric, steeped into the dew of the thickened sediment, the transcribed robe, and the German socialists wrapped their sorry eternal truths, all skin and bone, served to wonderfully increase the sale of the gods amongst such a public. On its part, German socialism recognized more and more in calling its bombastic representatives in the bourgeoisie philosophy. 10 more pages. I'm done. 10 more pages. Just 10 more pages. I just need to get through 10 more pages. Speed run. To claim the German nation, the model of the nation, a German petting Palestine in the typical man, to every villainous menace in this model man, to give a hidden higher socialistic interpretation of the exact contrary of its real character, and then went to the extreme length of directly opposing the brutal, destructive tendency of the communism, and proclaim its supreme and impartial contempt of all class struggles with very few exceptions. All the so-called socialist and communist publications of the now 1947 circulation in Germany belong to the domain of this foul, unrevering literature. 2. Conservative or bourgeoisie socialism. A part of the bourgeoisie socialism. A part of the bourgeoisie is desirable readiness and social grievance in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeoisie society. To this section, being economicist, philosopher, humanitarian, improves the conditions of the working class organized as shared members of society in which prevention of cruelty to animals, temperaments, financiers, hole in the corner, reformers of all imaginable kind. Reform socialism has moreover been worked out into a complete system. We may cite that Prohn's philosophy de la misère as an example as this form. The socialist bourgeoisie want all the advantages of modern social conditions without the struggles and dangers necessary resulting. Therefore, they desire the existing state of the society minus the revolutionary distinctive elements. They wish for a bourgeoisie without the proletariat. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it's supreme to be the best. Bourgeoisie socialism depends on this comfortable conception of the various more or less complete systems, and requiring the proletariat to carry out such a system and thereby to march straight way into the social New Jerusalem, but requires in reality that have proletariat should remain within bounds of the existing society, but should cast away in the hateful ideas concerning the bourgeoisie. A second, more practical but less systematic form of socialism sought to depreciate every revolutionary movement in the eyes of the working man class by showing that no mere political reform, but only change in materialistic conditions of the existence and economical relations could be of any advantage to them. By changes to the material conditions of existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of bourgeoisie relations with production, and abolition that can be effected only by revolution, but administration reforms based on the continued existence of these relations. Reforms, therefore, that in no respect affect the relations of capital and labor, but in the best lessen the cost of simplify the administration work of bourgeoisie government. Bourgeoisie socialism attends adequate expression when only when it becomes a mere figure of the speech. Free trade for the benefit of the working class, productive duties for the benefit of the working class, prison reform for the benefit of the working class. Last words, the only seriously meant to be bourgeoisie socialism. It is summed up for the phrase, the bourgeoisie is a bourgeoisie for the benefit of the working class. Critical utopia socialism and communism. We do not here refer to the literature which in every great modern revolution has always given voice to the demands of the proletariat, such as the writings of the Babeuf and others, the first direct attempts of the proletariat to attend its own meals, made in times of universal excitement when feudal society was being overthrown, necessarily failed, owing to them the underdeveloped state of the proletariat, as well as the absence of the economic conditions of emancipation, conditions that had yet been produced and could be produced by the impending bourgeoisie alone. The revolutionary literature accompanied by these first movement of proletarian is necessarily reactionary character. It included universal ascendance in the social leveling in crudest form. The social and communist systems, properly so called, those Saint Simon, Fourier, Owen, and others sprang into existence of the undeveloped period. Inside between the proletarian bourgeoisie, see section L, bourgeoisie and proletarians. The founder of these systems are indeed the class of antagonisms, as well as the actions of the composing elements of the prevailing in the society, but the proletarians, as yet in the infancy of the transfers to them in a spectacle of class without any historical initiative or independent political moving. Since development of the class and antagonisms keeps even peace with development of the industry and economic stature as they find it, does not as yet offer to them the material conditions of the epochs of the proletarians. They therefore search after a new social science, after the new social laws that are to create these conditions. Historical actions is to yield in their personal intervention action, historical creating conditions of the emancipation to fantastic ones, and the gradual spontaneous class organizations of the proletariat to an organization of the society, specially contrived by these inventors. Future history revolves itself in their eyes of the propaganda, the practical carrying out of their social plans, the formation of their plans, their consciousness of caring chiefly interests in the working class and the suffering of others. Only from the point of view of being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. The undeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own surroundings, cause socialists of this kind to consider themselves far superior to the class antagonisms. They want to improve the conditions of every member of society, even that the most favored, hence the habitual appeal to society at large, without distinction of class, nay, by preference of only people. How can people, when they want to understand their system, fail to see it in the best possible plan, the best possible state of society? Hence they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means and endeavor by small experiments necessarily doomed to failure, and by the force of example to pave the way for a new social gospel. Such fantastic pictures of the future society painted on a time which the proletariat is still in a very undeveloped state and has a fantastic conception of all of its own positions corresponding with the first instinctive yearnings of the class's general reconstruction of society. But these socialist and communist publications contain also a crucial element. They attack every principle of existing society, hence they are full of the most valuable materials in the enlightenment of the working class and practical measures proposed to them, such as the abolition of the distinction between town and country, the family, the carrying on the industries, and the accounts of the provocate individuals of the wage system. But these socialists and communists want to understand their system, fail to see in the best possible plan of the best possible state or society. Hence, they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means, and endeavor by small experience, necessarily doomed to failure. And by the forced example, pave the they pave the way for new social gospel. Such fantasies picture in the future society painted at which time the proletariat is still at the very underdeveloped state. Future society painted on such a time when the proletarians were still in a very undeveloped state. I read that. But socialist and communistic publications contain a social element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are full of the most valuable materials in the enlightenment of the working class. The practical measures that proposed to them, such as the abolition of the distinction between town and country, of the family, of the carrying on industry, of the account of the private individuals of the wage system. They proclaim the social harmony, the conversion of the functions of the state, and mere superindependency of the production. All those proposing point solely to the disappearance of the classic antagonisms which were at that time only just cropping up, and which in these publications are recorded in the earliest industrial of the undefined forms only. Their proposals, therefore, are purely utopia character. The significance of the central utopian socialism and communism bears in the inverse relations of the historical development and its proportion as the modern class struggles develops and takes definite shape, and the fantastic standing apart from the contest of the fantastic attacks on it lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, as the originators of the systems were in many respects revolutionary, their disciples have in every case formed merely reactionary sects. They hold fast by the original views of the masters, imposing to the progressive historical development of the proletariat. They therefore endeavor constantly to deaden the class struggle, to recounsel the class antagonisms, and they dream of experiencing realization of the social utopias found in the isolation parasites, of establishing home colonies, of setting up little isolaries, Simo editions of New Jerusalem, and all of castles in the air, and they compelled to appeal the feeling and purses of the bourgeoisie. By degrees, they sink into the category of the reactionary conservative socialists, depicted above. The deferring of these only by more systematic pendurity, and by the fanatical superstitious belief in the miracles effect of the social science. They therefore violently oppose all political action of the part of the working class of such according to them, and kill and abuse all in the blind of unbelief in the new gospel and the Owendies in England, the Forties in France, respectively opposing the trades and the reformists. Chapter 4. Positions of the communists, relaxings in various existing opposition parties. Section 2 has made very clear in relations of the communists to the existing working class and parties, such as the Chartists in England, the Agrarian reformers in America. The communists fight for the attainment in the immediate aims and the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class and the movement of the present. They also represent and take care of the future of the movement with the France and communistic ally, themselves the Social Democrats, against this conservative and radical bourgeoisie, reserving, however, the right they take up to a critical position regarding the phrases, illusions traditionally handed down by one of the Great Revolution. In Switzerland, they support the radicals without losing sight of the fact that the party consists of antagonistic elements, partly democratic socialists in the French sense, particularly a radical bourgeoisie. In Poland, they support the party that insists on agrarian revolution, a prime condition for national emancipation, and party that formated the insurrection of the Krakow in 1846. In Germany, they fight with the bourgeoisie whenever it acts on a revolutionary way against the absolute monarchy and the feudal scourge and the petty bourgeoisie, but never cease from a single instant to instill into the working class and the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonisms between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, in order for the German workers may straightway use the solely weapons against bourgeoisie and the social and political conditions, and the bourgeoisie must necessarily introduce, along with the supremacy of an order of that fall of the reactionary classes in Germany, the fight against the bourgeoisie itself may immediately begin. The communists turned their attention chiefly to Germany, because this country on the eve of bourgeoisie revolutions that is bound to be carried on under each advanced conditions of Europe's civilization, but with that much more developed proletariat than that of England in the 17th and in France of the 18th century. And because the bourgeoisie revolutionary in Germany will be but the prelude to immediately following proletarian revolution, in short, communists everywhere, supporting every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. In all of these movements, they bring the front of as the leading question in each the proletarian questions, no matter the degree of development at the time. Finally, they labor everywhere in the Union for the agreement of the democratic parties of the countries. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that the ends of may be attained for the forcible overthrow, but as the existing social conditions let the ruling classes tremble at the communistic revolution, the proletarians have nothing to lose but the chains. They have the world to win. Working men all over the countries unite.